Under $150, you'll actually be getting yourself a 13 megapixel camera, a 4G LTE Android 5.0 64-bit octa-core smartphone. That's a lot of bang for your buck in terms of specifications alone. So let's see how the device is built. Chinese manufacturers are really starting to up their game in terms of build quality, and the Mstar S700 is no exception. It has a beautiful metal trim running around the sides, a nice to touch matte plastic finish on the back, and a glossy front with a pretty decent screen to bezel ratio. But then again, having said that, it does look better than it actually is because of these black lines. You can see they're not actually part of the display. The buttons are really nice to touch, they're cold, they're metal, they're very solid, and the button placement is just about right, however a little bit alternative. Instead of being on the right hand side, it's all on the left, but once you get used to it, it's actually quite clever. So on the back we have the fingerprint scanner. Now this actually, you initially set it up by putting your finger on it 5 different times and it fully detects your finger, and to be honest it works extremely well. It actually detects your finger in almost any orientation. And then you also have the 13 megapixel camera, which protrudes a little more than I'd like, but it's not a disaster. Overall, the build on this device is really quite spectacular for the money. The quality is great, it looks great, and it feels great in the hand. So when you actually turn on the device, you'll be greeted by a 720p HD panel. This is hardly eye-popping resolution here. I mean, you can buy phones for the same price with a higher resolution display, that much I'll admit. Having said that, it's a pretty nice display to look at. This is hardly the outstanding LG Quad HD Quantum IPS display, but this is a reasonable display. It gets the job done, it's big, it's spacious, the colours are fairly vibrant, and the contrast is pretty good. Now, as you can see, the fingerprint scanner works extremely well and actually makes it a lot nicer to turn on your device, and pretty quick too. So let's take a quick look at the camera. So as you can see, we're using Google's stock camera launcher. This is the one that's preloaded on almost any Android device. This is the Lollipop version. It's pretty simple, to be honest. I mean, it's got a fair few things you can tweak, but they're kind of hidden away amongst other menus, and it's not exactly the best camera app. This phone also has a slight problem with under and overexposure. As you can see, in very testing scenarios, it does seem to overblow the whites and maybe shadow the darks a bit too much. But as you can see, if you actually set up your photos right, you can capture a pretty astonishing level of detail. This is 13 megapixels, and the sensor itself is not half bad. Having said that, your photos do generally turn out a little bit darker and a little bit less vivid than what they actually would be in real life, or against a higher end competitor like something like the LG G4. Taking a listen to the speakers, we can tell they're actually not very loud. Bass is muffled, and detail is just below average. So this device is running Android 5.0 Lollipop. It's good, but it's not great. This thing is unlikely to get an update to Android 5.1, but it's always a possibility. Having said that, this is still in the sort of top 5% of Android phones that actually run Lollipop, so I guess there's nothing to complain about. The settings menu is pretty standard with a couple of extra things thrown in, for example gesture support and finger scanner support. So the gestures involve things like being able to double tap to wake the device. Very useful actually, especially if it's on a flat surface and you can't reach for the button. Furthermore, you can actually draw things on the switched off display and it'll direct you straight to the appropriate app. That is also pretty useful and works extremely well. Apart from that, this is basically a standard Lollipop experience, but the additions that the company has made definitely add to the experience and make it a more enjoyable and complete package. This also comes with full Google Play support, and just about every single app I've tried works fine. The S700 comes loaded with very little bloatware, and as a result you'll basically be using Google's stock apps for almost all the day-to-day tasks. That includes keyboards, messaging, phone dialer, and as a result it's all very pleasing to the eye, fast to type on and well optimized, so I have no complaints there. To be honest, I kind of prefer this. So in terms of features altogether, the S700 fits somewhere in the middle of the line. Not great, but not bad. So on to performance, which is the most important category for pretty much any smartphone purchasing decision. The S700 is really fast in day-to-day tasks. It's powered by 2GB of RAM and the MTK6752 processor. This is an octa-core chip clocked at 1.7 GHz, and yeah, it's really quite nippy in terms of day-to-day tasks. Multitasking, flicking through the app drawer, flicking through the home screens, it powers through all of that with ease. The Antutu benchmark supports this result with an extremely high score of 44,247, basically at exactly the same level of all of last year's flagship devices. You know, admittedly it's not the same as the Galaxy S6, but when you're paying a quarter of that, it's hard to complain about performance. Now, although far from the snappiest web browsing experience I've ever had on a mobile device, the Mstar S700 actually copes reasonably well with the browser. I mean, it's fairly smooth in terms of scrolling, it loads pages fairly quick, and even high resolution images pose little problem. But it's not the fastest. So even in an intense 3D game like Terminator, as you can see here, it's actually playing it extremely well. Now this is actually unsurprising given its 2GB of RAM, octa-core processor, and low 720p resolution, because that means there's less pixels to push. So I suppose you would kind of expect this sort of performance, but nonetheless it's still pleasing to see. Basically all 3D, 2.5D and 2D games run perfectly, so yeah, that's great. And so in terms of performance, the Mstar S700 compares very favourably to any upper mid-range device, stuff like the Lenovo K3 Note, stuff like the Umi Hammer. This is really basically as good as you can get for a mid-range smartphone. So to conclude this review, the S700 has actually a lot going for it. It's built extremely well, it's built as good as any flagship device this year, last year, or any time before. Its combination of a large 3000 mAh battery, as well as efficient and low power components, means that it actually lasts almost 2 days in terms of battery. That's really good. It's using stock Google apps which are efficient and fast. And Mstar has added a little bit of personality with the gesture support as well as the fingerprint sensor on the back. I mean, that just sort of rounds off the package and gives the phone a little bit of uniqueness about it. Having said that, the speaker is really quite bad and the camera is not exactly top of the line. It is fast enough for just about anyone except the most power hungry users on the market, and while it's not the complete package that perhaps we were hoping for, it has some flair, it has some personality, and it's a good device.